Hi, this is Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz from Israel 365 News, coming at you live from the Golan with my dear friend John Enarson. We are going to be discussing something today that I really know very little about and have very little interest, but it is, I don't have a personal interest, but I have an intense interest in, which is the pagan roots of Christianity. And for me, this is interesting because if I'm going to be connecting with Christians, I want to know more about Christianity, something that as an American Jew, I knew absolutely nothing about my neighbors. So now that we're involved in this prophetic coming together to create a house of prayer for all nations, I want to get to know more. So that's why I turned to my dear friend John. So John, let's talk about this. I have a few ideas of where we can see pagan roots of Christianity. For example, Christmas. Yeah. And I've actually spoken to a lot of Christians who have stopped celebrating Christmas because of the pagan roots. If you look at Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 2, thus saith Hashem, learn not the ways of nations and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the nations are dismayed at them. For the customs of the peoples are vanity, for it is but a tree which one cuts out of the forest, the work of the handsman, the workman with the axe. They deck it with silver and gold, they fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it moves not. And there was even a source in the Talmud that they talk about how this middle of the winter was actually a pagan holiday that has great power, but it is so easily taken over by the dark side that the rabbis warned against it. So I think, So I think that Christmas is probably the clearest example, I think, of where we can see a pagan influence in Christianity. Am I wrong about that?
I think it is one of the clearest cases. But, this is a really sensitive topic. And first of all, people should know that I'm a Christian.
Sure.
I'm a Bible-believing Christian and a follower of Jesus. And I take these things seriously. I'm a theology student. And also I've had personal experience with these different issues. For example, Christmas, which is a touchy topic with family, and how people look at it. So I wouldn't say it's the pagan roots of Christianity. I would say that the roots of Christianity go back here to Jerusalem, but it's pagan influences that have been allowed to come in for different reasons. And we can talk about those historic reasons, but Christmas is one of them. So, wow.
I want to add, first of all, of course, no disrespect. And when I actually wrote that article, the people in the office who were all Orthodox Jews, when I said, "Oh, I'm writing an article about Christians who are leaving Christmas because of its pagan roots," they're like, "What? That's the best thing. We wish we could do Christmas. It's a beautiful holiday, and people are happy and joyous, and peace on earth, goodwill to men." But it's a beautiful holiday, and that we're a little bit. I don't know. I know some Jews who, I wouldn't say jealous, but it is a beautiful holiday.
Yeah. So obviously, if you grew up with which I did, I grew up with, the great feeling of making everything, like the lights very nice, decorating things nice, family, food, all of those things that definitely have a lot of strong connotations for people. But the actual roots of Christmas are not great. So it's an example of this. And before we get on to Christmas, we have to explain two things. One is that this came in by Christianity breaking itself off from the Jewish people because of replacement theology. So kind of an anti-Semitism. There were a lot of social factors because the Jewish revolts against Rome, two of them, the wars with Rome. So in the Roman Empire, the Jewish people ended up not being viewed very favorably at all. And Christianity didn't want to end up in the crosshairs of that. And so Christians who were not Jewish started saying, we're not with the Jewish people. And Jewish leaders had started coming out more and saying, we don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. So it was those two factors that kind of ended up, that is what scholars call the parting of the ways. That Christianity and Judaism started more and more defining each themselves against each other and splitting. And then Christianity was persecuted for a while in the Roman Empire, but then Constantine, we're not exactly sure why, but he decided to adopt the new faith and turn it into a permitted faith, and eventually, I think, the only legal faith of the Roman Empire. Now it was a Christian empire, but it was very political. It became nominally Christianity. Biblically, doesn't work that way. It's not just like, okay, now this whole country is Christian, everybody in it is Christian, whether you signed up for it or not. But it started becoming culturally Christian. And when that happened, they needed different ways to, for example, with Christmas, there was a holiday called Saturnalia, which was right around then. It's when the sun is the lowest, when it's darkest, the darkest time of the year. And then it was celebrated as the rebirth of the sun, Saturnalia. And that had made a big inroad in the Roman Empire. And there were many church fathers and bishops who wrote and didn't want anything to do with that holiday. But for political purposes, it was accepted into the church. And they said, look, there's that verse in the prophet says the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings. There's ways that we can just make connections here.
I'm sorry, when was this happening in Christianity?
So this is probably around 300s, late 300s, 400s.
So we're not talking about very early Christianity.
No. So earlier Christianity had fought more strenuously, and we should point out that Christianity did essentially defeat the gods of Rome eventually. I mean, they were persecuted for not offering sacrifices to the emperor, for not participating in idolatry. They were martyred for standing against that, and so it was left over from that different church leaders were protesting against the incorporation of Saturnalia, the Saturnalia holiday, the Roman sun worship feast that had been around. But it was eventually incorporated and tried to be given new Christian dress, so to speak. And it's the 25th of December, which is the culmination of the Saturnalia holiday. It was a longer, I think maybe a week, but the 25th of December was the big day. That was the rebirth of the sun. And they were like, well, we could just link this to passages in the Bible about the sun and incorporate it.
What is, just to show you, so many Jews know absolutely nothing about Christianity. What is Christmas? Is it supposed to, is it Jesus' birthday?
No. So as is fairly no, it's celebrated as his birthday today.
Is it?
So yeah. So if we've got this phenomena, right, that the church is trying to culturally make inroads in Europe, and there's a huge festival. There are different festivals, pagan festivals in the Roman Empire and in Europe. And they're saying you don't have to leave all your idolatry behind. You just have to put this within a Christian context. And some of it was brought in. So the 25th of December, we will celebrate the birth of the Son of Righteousness. We will say that is Jesus. And you just need to divert your reverence in a Christian manner. So then, but the New Testament doesn't say it's, the Jewish people don't make a big thing of birthdays and haven't historically. The only people who have birthdays in the Bible, in the in the Hebrew Bible, is Pharaoh, and he has somebody killed, right? And in the New Testament, the only one who has a birthday celebration is King Herod, and he chops off the head of John the Baptist. So Christians basically only have 2 birthdays in the Bible, and both of them is like a wicked king who kills somebody. Birthdays are not historically a big thing among the Jewish people, and Jesus' birthday his birth is described, but his birth date is not given.
Oh,
and
it's interesting the way you described it. Someone, Joan Harris Milbury, she said, it's funny to bring up paganism and Christianity on St. Patrick's Day, because St. Patrick used pagan ideas and symbols to teach the Irish about Christianity, which is what you were just saying. For example, the clover demonstrates the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost Spirit. So that's, I guess, if I'm not mistaken, that's also kind of what was happening when Catholicism and Christianity reached South America, that they started incorporating elements, which is why we now have a South American Pope, and it's a big shock to the Catholic world.
I would say, as far as I'm aware, the Latin American style of Catholicism is probably the most hardcore pagan influence that I know version of Christianity that I'm aware of, because so much the Catholic Church had already taken that approach, and by the time it got to Latin America and all the Inca and all the different religions, so much of that was taken in because Catholicism is more nominal. In biblical times, you signed up to become a disciple or a follower of Jesus, and you took on repentance, tshuva, from idolatry, and you started following this way. It was a personal decision. And then all of a sudden it becomes culturally, you are all now Christian because this is a Christian empire, Holy Roman Empire, wherever it may, or Catholic Roman Empire, wherever it may spread. And so much was brought in that way.
It's funny. I think maybe Judaism is better at that, in that Judaism is all over the world, and it's pretty universal. It's not. There aren't too many strange differences in the practices, and we certainly didn't take in any foreign practices. However, I do know that there are allegedly Jewish communities in South America that, for all intents and purposes, you look in from the outside, they look Jewish, they act Jewish, and then when you're in the inside, it's like, whoa, what are they doing? It really strange stuff. And then it takes a bit of scratching away at the surface to realize that these communities are not Jewish. And I've been stung a couple times by these groups in South America that, and I'm not saying, God forbid, all of them, but I've learned that I have to be more careful with South America than with the allegedly Jewish communities than I am in other areas of the world.
I'm not as familiar with Latin America either as I should be. I've had some interaction, but I do have a question for you about when it comes to the Jewish world later. But if we go back to Christmas, so we're in Europe. They're christening. They are christening, if you will, renaming Saturnalia into the church. But it's bringing in, as it reaches the Nordic regions, you start bringing in, so Santa Claus is a marrying of the tradition surrounding Saint Nicholas, who was a saint in the church, the Catholic Church anyway. I'm not into saints in that way. The Protestants aren't really. And then you have bringing in the Nordic gods. So he's actually a mix. I believe it's Wotan, like Wednesday is named after the pagan god Wotan. It could be Wotan. It's one of those, or Odin, basically, in Sweden. And also gnomes, little house gods. Where I'm from in Sweden, you have little gnomes, like they have little red hats. People put them in their gardens now, little statues of these house gods. So
Yeah.
those are house gods that are still like even kind of raw idolatry, like in Thailand, where you put food for the house gods. Some people will still, in Nordic regions, the old tradition is to put porridge out for the gnomes, which is basically a sacrifice to the house gods. So Christmas took on even more, like with Saturnalia, and started adding more traditions. And a lot of Christmas traditions we have are quite modern. But it's one thing's for clear. Biblically, probably Jesus was born around Passover or around Rosh Hashanah Sukkot time, when shepherds could be sleeping outside, still that time period.
Wow.
Definitely not Christmas time, December 25th. That's for sure. But there are a lot of Christians who, so here we get into the tricky territory of there's people who do pagan, who observe these things, but not in any sort of even knowledge of or connection to paganism. They won't do a Christmas tree, which is also the European kind of fertility traditions and so on. Nothing to do with Christianity. O Tannenbaum and all of that with the tree, which is why you read Jeremiah. So some people take this like way too far. So people who discover the kind of pagan roots of a lot of Christmas in Christianity will get very upset, will completely chuck Christmas, and it becomes, and they go on like a very dogmatic thing about it in their family and among their relatives. And it splits. I've known it's led to divorces.
I can imagine. I can totally imagine. Yeah.
All sorts of things. And a lot of Christians saying, like, look, we don't celebrate, we don't do Santa Claus. We may not even have a Christmas tree. We just honor the fact that Jesus was born, and we're happy about that. And we celebrate that with family and food at this time, because that's what our culture does. But we associate nothing else to it. I don't think, the problem to me is replacement theology. When replacement theology crept in, you couldn't read the Torah where it says, when you come into the land, you shouldn't adopt the worship practices and worship Hashem, God Almighty, using the patterns of the Canaanite nations. You don't take their traditions and then adopt them to worship the creator of the universe. That's what the Torah says, right? When you come into the land, don't worship me in their way. So
another one of these, I don't know anything about Christianity questions. You laid out last time a very interesting delineation of how Christianity does relate to the Torah laws. And if Judaism is replacement theology in anything, it came to replace idolatry. And there are stringencies pertaining specifically to idolatry that it's one of the more extreme things we try to avoid. Is there a prohibition in Christianity against idolatry?
Absolutely.
I really don't. I got to ask the question. I don't know. It's not meant as a like. It's not meant as a dig.
Okay, so the Ten Commandments, like, have had historically a very big place in Christianity. A very big place. So you see a lot of even it laid the foundation for a lot of the Protestant nations. It's even featured, like on all sorts of statues with Moses holding the tablets. It's on courthouses. It's on government buildings. This is like the great lawgiver, the Ten Commandments. Like for hundreds of years in Sweden, the child's education was Luther's little catechism, which was you learn the Ten Commandments, which is
the 9.5 really good suggestions. Okay.
Right. He reinterpreted the Sabbath, which we could get to. But aside from his creative reinterpretation of the Sabbath, it was you learn these laws, and they're the ones that's it. You shall have no other gods before me, so on. Secondly, idolatry is definitely in the New Testament, even if like you don't like when it comes to all the particulars of Jewish particulars of tzitzit or kosher or other laws. Like, that's not necessary for those who are not Jewish. But what you definitely have to do as a Gentile is you have to reject idolatry. You cannot offer. Yeah. So those were like, when they made the big decision in the book of Acts chapter 15 about what to do with Gentiles, it was, okay, you don't need to convert to become Jewish, but you have to do 4 things. And chief among them is anything contaminated by idolatry may not be done. Sexual immorality may not be done. And those were like the 2 biggest. And that's definitely understood in the church. So
how do you define idolatry and paganism?
There, it's tricky. If all of a sudden
it is tricky. It's, people are
right. So the in my opinion,
I'll tell you why I'm asking. It's funny, people. It's one of these things where people say, "Well, I can't define it, but when I see it, I know it." That's not true.
That's not good enough.
Yeah, and like, for example, I'll tell you. I write a lot of articles. Paganism, witchcraft, these things are making a big comeback these days, big time.
Mm-hmm.
I started, I'm very open-minded, and I am a former hippie. So someone was talking to me about the Burning Man Festival, and I was like, "You know the Burning Man Festival?"
Enough to know that it's definitely got major occult.
Oh my gosh! It is. You might as well just have the guy, this horn guy goat thing running around. And I was like, but no, it's a cool art festival. And then you start looking. They have, what is it, a 7-headed dragon? They turned a bus into is it a 7-headed snake dragon kind of thing? They have they have like the Temple of Shiva. These are permanent installations they have every year. And I'm not making this up. It blew me away when I saw it. I just couldn't believe it. They set it up in the middle of the desert, and the campground is kind of set up like a semicircle, and there is a pentagram in the middle of it. And I was like, dude, I mean, come on. And more and more, and people are like, no, it's an art festival. And I'm like, okay, it's an art festival. Then why these symbols? Just so time after time, a temple to this, a temple to that. Oh, but we're no religion. And I'm like, but. So, and it's very insidious in culture. This is another thing that blew me away. Kamala Harris, her mother is Hindu. And there was a demonstration. It was actually a counter demonstration against a group of, I think they were probably Christians, came to protest for Trump, to protest for him.
Yeah.
The counter protest, they showed up, and they had this person dressed up as Trump. They ripped a real heart, I hope an animal heart, out of this person's shirt, started eating it, and started chanting to a Hindu god. And I'm just like, well, that's a rather unusual political statement.
Yeah,
so there is certainly a resurrection of idolatry today. I personally feel that this imperative to have very late, if not later than that, abortions. People say, "Oh, anti-abortion is going backwards in time," and I'm like, no, we're going forwards. Backwards in time is a laissez-faire, whatever you want, sexuality, and abortion. So I could say idolatry is not caring about life. So how do you define idolatry?
Idolatry.
Can I add to that before you go on?
I was hoping you would, Josh. I had a feeling. I appreciate how you were holding yourself back and not jumping down my throat on that.
In Judaism, we have a concept known as shituf, which is a not direct idolatry, but concept of combining adding to God, meaning not that you're replacing God, but you're adding to God. And included in that is the idea, for example, of a Trinity. The fact that you can split God or add to God. You can split him into three parts, or you can add to him in any way, even if you're not replacing him, is all part of the concept of idolatry according to Judaism. So my question would, to add to what Leo is asking, is what is the concept of adding to or splitting of the divine? Is that also considered in Christianity to be idolatry?
So in the church, working out the position and the relationship between Jesus and God and so on early took a lot of debate. But I'd say most Christians would consider it to be a mystery. I think that there's two approaches. What I see kind of like when I look at this and compare it to Judaism, which is like, how would I say? I wish I had the quote in front of me, but there's a Jewish philosopher named Michael Visegrod, who was a student of Soloveitchik, I believe, an Orthodox Jew. And he was saying, like, look, don't accuse Christianity de facto of saying it's completely impossible to interpret the Hebrew Bible this way, of the divinity of God basically localizing in one Jew. So I would suggest people check that out. But when it comes to the Trinity, I think it is the best explanation that Gentiles who were not brought up in a Jewish environment, the best way that Gentiles were able to take all the pieces in front of them and explain them together. That's the doctrine of the Trinity. And I know a lot of Jewish people would consider that to be paganism, but at the same time,
could you repeat that? That's a really important concept.
That Jewish people consider the Trinity to be paganism, or
the splitting of a just to continue, a Father, a Son, a Holy Ghost. This concept is splitting the divine into multiple parts, and we don't believe that we're able to, like I said, divide God. We're not able to divide it, and we're not able to subtract. We're not able to divide. We're not able to multiply. The math doesn't apply to the divine. So what we have is we have one, and that is the essence and the foundation to Judaism. That's why we have the Shema prayer, the Shema Yisrael Shema Hashem Echad, that He is one. Although Rav Soloveitchik actually has a different interpretation of what that means. He says that it doesn't mean one and not multiple gods. He says that's obvious that we're talking about monotheism. So clearly we would not even think of that. He actually defines it differently to say that achad in that verse, one actually means unique. And just like God is unique, completely unique, all human beings that are made in the image of God are also completely unique. But putting that teaching aside, the foundation to Judaism is that you cannot divide in any way God. And as soon as you start speaking about God in parts, or any additions to God, to the one God, then you are definitely bordering on idolatry, if not already going. Oh, it's a fine line, but when it comes to this idea of shituf, of combinations, that is something that is completely restricted and a violation of Torah law.
So I would say that biblically, from my perspective of looking at the Bible, God is one. But to me, He seems complex in His unity. And it's a mystery that I can't fully explain. And Christians hold that they can't fully explain it either. Now, when it comes to Judaism, where they're going to look at Christians who believe in the Trinity to be idolatrous or not, sometimes Jews describe Christianity as monotheism, and sometimes they say technically not, and say Christians are raw pagans because they believe in the Trinity. That's not for me to decide how you guys can view that.
Are there Christians that don't believe in a Trinity?
Very few. There is a Trinitarianism and Unitarianism. So a few a few people, like I think, for example, Sir Isaac Newton, the famous Christian scientist, he was a Unitarian. Some of the founders of America were Unitarian for a while, but it doesn't it holds very little, if no sway in Christianity, really. So
where did they base their Unitarianism?
Actually, I'm sorry, Josh. I'm really interested. John never defined for me how would a Christian define idolatry?
How a Christian would define idolatry?
I really need to know this.
Okay, I would say that for a Christian, they would say take the 10 Commandments and look at, you shall have no other gods before me. That one, and then the one that says you shall make no graven images. But they're confused. Christians are generally confused about that one because obviously there's some art, there was some engravings in the temple and so on. So they're wondering exactly where does the line go. But Protestants definitely reject the way that Catholics venerate statues, 3D graven images, and bowing down to them. Protestants would say that's idolatry. You cannot do that. Catholics would say we're not actually praying to them. We're turning our hearts to God, and this is a helpful way to do that. And Protestants say no. You can't do it. It's idolatry. So, and the other thing is with images, 2D images have been accepted quite a bit. I don't accept them in worship. And like I said, that before the Protestant conflict with the Catholics over this issue, there was in the Byzantine era, like in Turkey and the Byzantine Empire, there was iconoclasts, people who said the 2D images were not permitted. And eventually the people who permitted them won out, but there was quite a fierce struggle over that. And it definitely didn't exist in early Christianity. That it was not known. There wasn't Christian art. It was essentially the Jewish tradition of no images. So I would say some compromises have been made, and I don't think we should do, like I say we should return to a Jewish traditional way of understanding when it comes to images and statues and veneration. That's the biblical way. And it has been for a lot of Christianity. And Luther compromised on that point. I think the Anglicans, like in the Church of England, didn't compromise as much. In the Reformation, I think they got rid of quite a bit of imagery, more than in the Lutheran tradition. So I don't know. Does that answer your question? There's no, by the way, sacrifices to any pagan gods. You may not. For example, one thing, I don't know, you might find interesting is there's a huge, massive movement because of idolatry and the occult and forbidding, paganism being forbidden. Tons of Christians will not read Harry Potter. Never.
I know it's beautiful. It's beautiful. My son is a huge Harry Potter fan. 9 years old. He's read it several times, all of the books. And when I'm confronted by Christians who reject Harry Potter, katonti, I'm like, I respect that hugely. And not just Harry Potter. And I see that. And
explain this to me, because I'm not. First of all, I don't understand why reading something would be a violation of idolatry. Although it probably is not a recommended practice, but it wouldn't be in itself be idolatry, even if it was an adulterous work. But then I don't understand exactly what you're comparing. I mean, black magic, is that what you're trying to speak about?
I think there's definitely a side to say there's a lot of. I mean, there's black magic. There's black magic. It's definitely
the Christian argument among evangelicals about those who reject like reading Harry Potter and so on would be that it is, you are deriving entertainment and joy and benefit from reading about occultism and black magic. And particularly with Harry Potter, the rumor mill that goes among Christians, I don't know if it's true, but I think so, is that in her research for writing the books and so on, incorporated a lot of actual real black magic spells and so on.
So interestingly enough, the Sanhedrin, the high court, Jewish court, which it doesn't exist today, but it is a court that sits in the Temple Mount and is the supreme court when it comes to all Jewish legal matters. All of the judges on this court had to be experts in black magic. For that reason, they had to read the materials. They had to know the difference between trickery, between basic hand tricks and magic, because when a person would be brought to the court and would be accused of black magic, there's a difference of this is a capital punishment, so it's a difference of life and death. So a person would have to know whether they're just tricks like most magicians, or I would say perhaps all magicians today do, or whether it's actually black magic, in order to know whether this person is guilty of that crime.
I also want to point out this odd inner contradiction we have. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that I'm a huge fan of the temple. And if you went into the temple and you went into the Holy of Holies, there was this big golden box. And what was on top of the box? The two little winged babies dancing, the cheruvim. And I mean, there you go into the innermost Holy of Holies. And if I'm not mistaken, there were also statues in the Holy of Holies.
There were two large images behind
Right.
the Ark of the Covenant, which were made out of wood, and they also were angelic in nature. It actually, the Talmud actually addresses the point that you're making, and it actually says, because there used to be a very, very strong evil inclination, we call it a Yetzer Hara, to worship idols. Today we don't have it. Most people are not sneaking, around the bush in order to grab their idol and bow down to it. But in those days, there was actually an evil inclination that people had that was considered to be as strong as the evil inclination people have today for the opposite sex. Something which today we can understand much better, but we can't understand this concept of the inclination to worship idols. So the Talmud explains that the rabbis got together and decided to actually destroy this inclination, and that's why we don't have it today. But where did they find? Again, this is just perhaps an analogy. But where did they find this evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara of idolatry hiding? It was in the Holy of Holies, in the Kodesh HaKodashim. And there was a very, very fine line that Elio, I think, is hinting to. There was a very fine line between idolatry and our worship, and that was where. And today we can argue the same thing with many of the purpose of us. Our purpose in this world is in order to be able to create that definition and do the right thing. And wherever we have these questions of what is right and what is wrong is exactly the line of where our purpose in this world is, in order to be able to overcome that. And that is a very. I'm not going to go too deep into this today.
But for example, another example might be we're forbidden to wear wool and linen together. Okay. However, the Kohanim, part of their biblically mandated dress included a belt made of linen, a mixture of linen and wool.
Almost all of the garments had a mixture of wool and linen. Many of the things they did in the thing.
Tzitzit as well, right?
Tzitzit. That
was like the common man's connection to the priesthood.
That's true. Yeah. So
tzitzit are not a mixture of wool and linen.
But you can.
If you have a linen garment, then the tzitzit themselves have to be linen. If they're wool, then the tzitzit have to be wool. So there's no mixing of the two.
So I think Josh understood me correctly. First of all, idolatry is not so simple. And I definitely hear the Harry Potter thing. I'm not ready to go there with my son yet, but I definitely hear it and respect it. I definitely think there's a huge comeback for idolatry these days, and it doesn't look like a bunch of old men, dressed up like goats. I think it's actually taking on a new modern incarnation. It's certainly something built into us, which is why I think it was included in the temple, as a way of combating it.
In the West, most Christians talk about more metaphorical idolatry. So something like, where do you go for your comfort? Who is your primary source? Is it God, or is it some other thing that you actually go to for your help, for your comfort, for your primary source? Is that God, or is it something else, or something that takes the place of where the position that God should have in your life? And that's very true. We could talk about worshiping money and power and sexuality and all those things. But at the same time, I think we do have kind of a little bit of a Western mindset. There's still probably a good 25% of the world where raw paganism with thousands, if not millions, of gods are worshipped, with sacrifices, prostration, belief, all of those things, and it's very, very powerful.
I'm laughing. I had an Israeli friend. He was raised in a religious home, and he decided he didn't want to be so religious. So after the army, he took us after the army world tour, and he got to India, and he was having a blast. And he said he was like backpacking through this back village that was in the middle of nowhere in India, and it was so fascinating. And then all of a sudden he saw this parade, people dancing around, carrying this big golden idol with flowers on it, and they were chopping up animals and throwing it at it. He's just like, oh my gosh, just like in the Torah. He thought, come on, he was just totally floored. He couldn't handle it. He's like, this is what my rabbi was telling me about when I was a little kid. And yes, it does exist. Like I said, even
billions of people today.
And yes, also, there are millions at least people today who are straight up. And what are you going to say? I mean, that's their culture. It's literally what predated Judaism.
So that's been very
replacement theology.
So that's been very big for Christianity. There's a good scholarly book that's been out that atheists are also appreciating as well. It's called "Destroyer of the Gods: How Christianity Essentially Destroyed the Pagan Gods of Europe through its movement, through its religious movement."
Really?
By Larry Hurtado. He just passed away, but he's a great, one of the top academic scholars on Christianity and Christian origins in the world. So that's a good tip for people to look at, Destroyer of the Gods. And he's top-notch scholar, world-class, who just passed away. And also, this is what the Christian missionary movements were doing. I don't agree with the Catholic methods of enforcement and so on, but the evangelical ones was completely nonviolent. And that's what they would do. They would go to Africa. They would go to India. They were part of getting rid of such practices as very big thing that Christians have gotten rid of. First in Europe and the Roman Empire was casting out children to die when they're born if you don't want them. There wasn't as much abortion back then, but if you didn't want a baby, you put it out in nature, threw it on the beach, left it to die.
Or you sacrificed it.
Yeah, that. And they got rid of those type of things in India, widow burning, and those are the things that Christian outreach throughout the centuries would tackle, and many of them would be killed by pagans and martyred and so on. And then other people would say, "Yeah, I think it's there is no there are no now other gods. Paganism is not true. We decide to follow Christianity."
Stymie has asked a few times whether Judaism believes Christianity is idolatry. I just wanted to answer that and say that there is a definitely a controversy as to whether Christianity is idolatry in general. And then, and specifically, when you get into different denominations of Christianity, like John's been saying, there are definitely ones that are more clearly considered to be idolatrous than others. But in general, there is a famous controversy going back to medieval times as to whether Christianity is idolatry. Also, there's a question as to whether Islam is idolatry. The common practice is for Orthodox Jews that they do not enter into churches, but they do enter into mosques if necessary, and there's no reason really to go to either of them. One generally, you'll find that Orthodox Jews will not go into the area of a church. In fact, I've had this issue personally many times during travels around the world. I'm recalling now being in Mallorca. And in Mallorca, which also has a very ancient Jewish converso community that was forcibly converted to Christianity, and they practiced Judaism secretly. And they have some of the oldest pieces, Jewish paraphernalia, I'll say, from pre-1492. So there's a museum there that's unbelievable there, but it's part of a church. And we went in actually to see these museum pieces. And after you see the museum pieces, they escort you into the sanctuary of the church. And we refused to go there. And we got into a whole fight with the guards there because we wanted to just see the Jewish pieces and then turn around and leave. And they didn't want us to leave. They wanted us to go through the sanctuary. Eventually, we fought with them and called the police, and eventually let us out. But it was quite. In general, just to answer your question, we definitely shy away from going into church sanctuaries. When it comes to mosques, if there was a reason to go in, most Orthodox Jews see Islam, according to Maimonides' position, as not being idolatrous, and therefore they would not have a problem going to a mosque if they had to. That is the simple answer.
So this is another one of those classic cases where Josh and I disagree. Okay.
On what point?
I'm just stating what
Exactly.
mainstream Orthodoxy believes. I mean, Elio is not mainstream Orthodoxy, so he'll have his own opinions.
Right. This is one of those things where Josh, and I are juggling hand grenades, and then I look up and say, gee, where did this ring come from? Okay.
I will say I sympathize very much with the Jewish position of just saying all churches, we don't make a difference, because one church who might be Catholic may have 2,000 statues in it, which I find
she's continuing her question and asking whether Jesus is what makes it idolatry. Again, Jesus is a historical figure, so that in itself is not idolatrous. It's a question of the worship of this person. If you're bowing down to this person, if you're praying to this person, if you're worshiping that person, and again, according to Judaism, he was a human being, so therefore any worship of a human being would in itself be defined as idolatry.
Also, I'll tell you why I disagree with Josh. What he said was absolutely factual, but the truth is that as Jewish law halacha is always based on the reality as it's sitting in front of you. For example, if you have a question about whether an oven is kosher, and if you can even cook meat and milk in the same oven, it depends on what the ovens are like. You know, if it's a modern microwave, or if it's a convection oven, you have to ask what's the reality. And my big criticism of rabbis as an institution is they are not really coping with many issues that are really important for today. One of these big issues is Christianity. Does Judaism consider Christianity idolatry? There has not really been a universal set accepted rabbinic decision on that. There have been some major rabbis who here and there have made conditional or partial statements about that. I don't think, in my opinion, there has not been a universal standard decisive rabbinic rule on that. on whether or not
Well,
Christianity
you're shying away
which
from the subject
aspect.
because there has not been a decisive rabbinical rule on almost anything. We have a lot of different opinions
Okay,
in Judaism. So
okay.
saying that does not mean that there isn't a consensus and that there isn't a mainstream
I
consensus, which
think
there
it means
is.
that there is not a consensus. I do
Okay,
think
well,
that that's what it means, and I think that you have to define. I mean, because you can't say does Judaism consider Christianity idolatry? Well, I mean, come on, you're talking about Christianity. It's a huge world. You're not talking. That's and I mean, John is blowing me away. He's talking about aspects of his personal belief that I do not. I mean, you don't understand it. What's a Unitarian? I don't know. What was the other thing you asked about? What was the expression you used to describe your belief?
Mine?
Yeah,
Oh, charismatic.
charismatic. I mean, we knew you were a charismatic guy, but we didn't know how that expressed itself in theology. We're going to try to address this. I'd like to bring on a rabbi who has opinions about this, or maybe it's such a huge issue. I would not mind addressing it more than once, just because.
Yeah, there's no way we could dive into talking about the Trinity, Unitarianism, Jewish view, and Christian view on that, because it's an impossibly huge topic to actually do justice. That's why I'm going to avoid it this time.
Right. Exactly. Me too. Exactly.
No offense to your question, Josh. I'm just saying there's no way for me to dive into it in this short amount of time without thinking.
I never take offense. I just when my only comment I will make is, and I mean this with all due respect, when you're talking about a fundamental that is so huge, that's, like you said, one of the 10 commandments, and your answer, not you, I don't mean you, Don, but the answer that is given is that it's a mystery, so we don't know. That, to me, we don't, even within Judaism, and like I just said, there are many different opinions and different things in Judaism. But when you talk about certain fundamentals, there are red lines. And to say that something so fundamental is just a mystery, so we don't know, maybe yes, maybe no, maybe we're worshiping God, maybe we're not, we're worshiping idols. That's a big if to say that it's just a mystery. But again, like you said, we can get you other times because it's a huge subject.
I found the quote that I was looking at from Visegrad, which we could talk about if we were to address this issue at some point. But it says like this: Visegrad urges from the Jewish side that Jews not pursue a fallacious dismissal of the divinity of Christ that operates on a priori grounds. In other words, while Jews, Visegrad included, can and perhaps even should reject the divinity of Christ, they should not do so by attempting to argue that God's incarnation, that is, becoming flesh, in man is somehow inconsistent with the teaching of the Hebrew Bible. On the contrary, there is much merit to the Christological position that posits the, quote, indwelling of God in Israel by constraining that indwelling in one Jew rather than leaving it diffused in the people of Jesus, the Jewish people, as a whole. So he was more open to that concept. Yes. So it's kind of an alternate perspective to Soloveitchik. Mir Soloveitchik wrote kind of an obituary eulogy about Visegrad. It's an alternate view than Soloveitchik's more stringent view on dialogue with Christians. Visegrad was more lenient, and so this is some of his thoughts.
Well, I don't know him. Soloveitchik, Rabbi Shaber Soloveitchik, J.B. Soloveitchik. He first of all ordained more rabbis than anyone in Jewish history, modern Jewish history. Thousands and thousands of rabbis, which went all different directions. Some of them more towards orthodoxy, some of them away from orthodoxy. But his position was very, very clear on this, as far as. He was against any type of interfaith dialogue. He didn't believe that you could have interfaith dialogue for the reason he believed that we can have civil relations with our neighbors, but as soon as you get into theology, he says we're talking about like on two different wavelengths. So there is no way to to bridge those without one of the sides compromising on their faith, which is uncompromisable. So that was the fact that he has a student that's saying otherwise doesn't surprise me. I don't know him personally, the person you're quoting. It doesn't surprise me, but a lot of his students did go in all different directions over the years, and
okay. Did you put up the comment by Miriam Esther? Yeah, so Miriam Esther, she said, Adam and Josh, don't try to do apologetics in favor of John. Why are you talking about rabbinic consensus? Doesn't Tanakh have a lot of instructions from Hashem about this? Actually, no. And that's
I would say yes. I'm not apologetic at all.
Yes.
So
you'll have to show me which verses specifically say that Christianity is idolatry.
In Christianity, the concept of apologetics is not to apologize. It's to kind of give an answer for your position. So she's saying, don't be favorable by trying to explain my position. Instead, use the Tanakh to hammer me.
Okay. Now, there's an expression in Jewish law, lekol chula yesh chumra, lekol chumra yesh kula. Every time you express a stringency, you're being lenient in another direction, and the opposite is also true. Meaning, if I say, "Oh, I'm going to be extra strict about kashrut, about keeping kosher," well, I'm throwing away money, and that's forbidden. If I say I don't eat at my neighbor's house because he keeps kosher, well, that's a stringency. But now I'm being lenient when it comes to loving another Jew. So what is at stake here, and specifically now, is if we are going to be stringent about even idolatry, which is something you should be stringent about, and we make a knowledgeable, I mean knowledge in a Torah sense, a non-knowledge based decision, and just throw this blanket out there, we are actually going to absolutely miss a house of prayer for all nations.
I disagree.
Being a light unto the nations. If a person is not an idolater and we exclude them from the temple, then we're doing something horrible. If a person is not an idolater and we do not extend to them the opportunity to receive the teaching from Zion, then that's a horrible miss. So you can say, let's be stringent and say they're all idolaters. So, but if you do that, you're actually being just saying that's one man's opinion.
You froze there at the end, but I clearly disagree with you. And as I expressed earlier, all nations clearly means when the verse says nations, it's not referring to other religions, it's referring to other nations around the world. True. And as soon as they come to the realization that there is one true God, that is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then they are more than welcome to come to the temple. Until then, they are not, and they will be rejected from coming to the temple because they are.
And I agree with you.
Idolatry.
If you're going to be stringent on that, then you're being too lenient and missing a house of prayer for all nations. You're missing being a light unto the nations. You're missing so much.
But I agree with Joshua when it comes to that. The question is just, for Judaism, how are you going to define me? That's the question.
Exactly. It's not comfortable.
Which is where I sympathize with you, Eliyahu. But if
I definitely define this charismatic.
if we leave the issue of the Trinity aside and we talk about paganism, so let's just say Christmas for me as a Christian, this is something that I try to explain to my fellow Christians and whoever might be watching. I don't celebrate Christmas because I do believe it's a pagan influence that is unbiblical. It shouldn't have been allowed into Christianity, but I don't do it in order to minimize the life of Jesus or the gift that he has come. I do it out of respect for him because he would not have celebrated Christmas in that way either, or instituted it, or nor did his followers for many, many, many years and a long time after the apostles. So I do it out of respect for him that I don't celebrate Christmas. And I would suggest that you might take a look at it as well. But please don't split your family and make it into a massive thing. Just be careful with these kind of bombshells.
Okay, I think we're...
Unless you happen to be an intermarried Jew and Gentile, we're more than happy that you split your family, because we don't believe in that. Unless one of you wants to come and join our faith, and we do not proselytize. I don't know, somebody said do no proselytize. I'm not sure if he was referring to John or us. But
Josh, no more proselytizing me.
It's interesting that even though I disagree with Eliyahu and I may be considered to be much more stringent when it comes to these affairs, I think that the fact that I am willing to get on a screen with someone like John, or even worse, like someone like Eliyahu, it takes a while from here. That is something which would be rejected by many people, and I am willing to have a superficial dialogue, like a civil dialogue. I'm just not willing to argue points of theology, because, like I said, I'm not willing to compromise my faith. I'm sure that John is not willing to compromise his. So there's no really point in trying to see who's going to win that kind of argument.
God willing, if we don't get into a fist fight in the meantime, God forbid, we are going. This is actually the direction I was hoping to go in, which was to the main obstacle to creating this house of prayer for all nations. This main obstacle for Jews and Christians coming together is precisely the question: can Judaism do that? I think it's also hugely important to Christianity. Christianity has at least been influenced historically by paganism through having more contact with paganism.
We've destroyed a lot of it, but we've allowed some in too.
And I think devout Christians, I'm sure it's important to them to relate to this aspect of the Ten Commandments, to be very careful in their own personal lives about, is there idolatry and how can you relate to it? I'm going to hopefully, like I said, the plan is this is what this was. I remember when I went snorkeling down in the Sinai, you're like over this crystal clear water and you're in 3 feet of water and all of a sudden it drops down to 80 feet. Well, this is us.
The blue hole.
This is us peeking over the edge, okay, and looking at how deep this water is. This is a huge question. It's hugely important, hugely complex, and it goes very deep. It's really emotional from all sides, from the Jewish side, from the Christian side. And the more you care about it, the more you care about serving God, whichever side of the coin you're on, the more important this is to you and the more explosive it is. So hopefully we'll be dealing with this again in the future.
Would love to. I'm really grateful to you guys for doing this.
These are the tough questions that no one's talking about and that really need to be addressed. I so appreciate John. I so appreciate Josh. I feel very blessed that I'm able to participate in this kind of dialogue.
I tolerate Elio.
Yes, you like me. Stop it. You like me a lot. I know it.
I want my wife to get jealous.
And I have some bottles for you, Josh. David Zabel gave me a present, so I have some bottles for you. There you go. After Pesach. Okay, after Pesach. That's how much I like you. Okay, so this is an ongoing, I don't know what you want to call it. It's more than a discussion. It's way more than a discussion. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We're going to be going on with this more. Stay tuned. Keep your eyes out for the announcements. Josh is good about putting them up. I'm slightly less. Yeah, we'll be doing this again and going deeper into that blue hole. Thanks so much for joining us. If you bless us, we got to bless you back. That's the way that's written. That's what the big man said. Thank y'all. Have a great day.
The big man's not a man. And we have a special message. Please stay with
Oh,
us.
special message.
שלום לכם, שמי ברוך בן יגאל ואני אבא של לוחם סיירת גולני, עמית בן יגאל. בליל הסדר הזה ישאלו כל עם ישראל, מה נשתנה הלילה הזה? מה נשתנה הלילה הזה עבורי זה שעמית לא נמצא איתי, יהיה כיסא אחד ריק, כיסא אחד לכבודו של הבן שלי שלא נמצא כאן איתי. הבן היחיד שלי שהקדוש ברוך הוא נתן לי ונלקח ממני בי"ח אייר תש"פ. אני מבקש מכולם להשאיר כיסא אחד ריק לעמית. כיסא אחד שבו נזכיר לכולנו שיש לנו ערבות הדדית. כל ישראל ערבים זה לזה. הערבות ההדדית, עמית בשנה שעברה נלחם בשביל כולנו. כולנו נשאיר כיסא אחד ריק למען עמית. תודה רבה.